The dust-laden wind stung Lillian Montgomery's tear-streaked face as the wagon bounced along the rutted trail, each jolt a painful reminder that she was being taken against her will to a future she desperately wanted to escape. Her wrists were raw from the rope binding them together, but the physical pain paled in comparison to the ache in her heart. It was 1876, 3 months after Lillian's 18th birthday, and the promise of a new life in the West had turned into a nightmare. Her uncle, a man she barely knew, had arranged for her to marry a wealthy cattle baron in Montana Territory, a man 3 times her age who had already buried 2 wives. The stagecoach depot in Silver Creek was less than a day's journey away, and from there, she would be transported to a life of servitude and misery. "You'll thank me one day, girl," her Uncle Silas grumbled from the driver's seat, his voice rough from too much whiskey and too many cigars. "A woman needs security in these parts. What would you do otherwise? Work in a saloon, become a laundress. This way you'll have a proper home." Lillian didn't bother responding. She had pleaded her case until her voice grew hoarse during the first 2 days of their journey. Now, she saved her strength and prayed for a miracle. The wagon crested a small hill, revealing the vast expanse of golden prairie stretching out before them. In the distance, mountains rose like sentinels against the azure sky. If circumstances had been different, Lillian might have marveled at the beauty. Instead, she saw only her prison. "We'll make good time," Silas said to the man beside him, Jeb, his business partner and the one who'd arranged the marriage deal. "Should reach the depot by sundown." Jeb nodded, counting invisible coins in his head. Lillian knew her uncle was receiving a substantial payment for delivering her to her intended husband. The wagon rolled on for another hour before Lillian noticed a figure in the distance, a lone rider silhouetted against the horizon. As they drew closer, she could make out the broad shoulders of a cowboy atop a magnificent black stallion. He wasn't moving, simply waiting in the middle of the trail. "What in tarnation?" Silas muttered, slowing the horses. "Jeb, get your rifle ready, might be trouble." The wagon came to a halt 20 yards from the stranger. From her position in the back, Lillian could see him clearly now, tall and lean, with a weathered Stetson pulled low over his eyes. His duster coat moved gently in the breeze, revealing a gun belt at his hip. "State your business, stranger," Silas called out, his hand moving toward the shotgun at his feet. The cowboy didn't move from his position, effectively blocking their path. "I believe you're carrying something that doesn't belong to you," he said, his voice calm but with an edge of steel. "Everything in this wagon is mine by right," Silas replied. "Now move aside before I make you." The cowboy shifted slightly, and Lillian caught a glimpse of piercing blue eyes beneath the brim of his hat. "The young lady," he said, "is she traveling of her own free will?" Lillian's heart leapt in her chest. How did this stranger know? She hadn't seen another soul for miles. "That's none of your concern," Jeb snapped, raising his rifle. In a motion so fluid it seemed almost casual, the cowboy drew his revolver and fired a single shot, sending Jeb's rifle flying from his hands. "I'll ask again," the cowboy said, his aim now fixed on Silas. "Is the lady traveling willingly?" "No," Lillian cried out before her uncle could answer. "They're taking me to be married against my will. Please help me," the cowboy's expression darkened. "I thought as much," he gestured with his gun. "Both of you down from the wagon, hands where I can see them." Silas cursed but complied, as did Jeb, who was nursing his stinging hands. "The lady stays in the wagon for now," the cowboy instructed. "You two walk 10 paces that way." He nodded toward a cluster of rocks off the trail. Once Silas and Jeb were at a safe distance, the cowboy dismounted and approached the wagon. Up close, Lillian could see that he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps in his late 20s, with a strong jawline shadowed by a day's growth of beard. "My name's Ross Blackwood," he said, reaching for the knife at his belt. "I'm going to cut you loose, miss." "Lillian." "Lillian Montgomery," she replied, holding out her bound wrists. "How did you know I was being taken against my will?" Ross's knife made quick work of the ropes. "I've been tracking this wagon since yesterday morning. Heard some unsettling talk in town about a man selling his niece to Claude Devereaux." He spoke the name with undisguised contempt. Lillian rubbed her wrists, relief and gratitude overwhelming her. "Claude Devereaux, that's the man they arranged for me to marry. Do you know him?" "Everyone in these parts knows Devereaux," Ross said grimly. "And no one with a conscience would send a young woman to him." A shout from Silas interrupted them. "You have no right. She's my niece, and I'm her legal guardian." Ross turned, his hand returning to his revolver. "A guardian protects, sir. You were selling her like livestock." "What are you going to do with us?" Jeb called out nervously. "That depends," Ross replied. "Do you have any money on you?" "Money that doesn't belong to Mr. Devereaux," Lillian spoke up. "There's a small chest under the seat. It contains my parents' savings, all I have left of them. My uncle took it when they died last winter." Ross nodded and retrieved the chest, confirming it contained several gold coins and bank notes. "This should be enough to see you safely to somewhere Devereaux can't reach you," he told Lillian. "You can't do this," Silas bellowed. The law out here protects those who deserve protecting," Ross cut him off. "Now, you two have a choice. You can walk back to town, it's only about 15 miles, or you can try something foolish and see how that works out for you." Jeb tugged at Silas's sleeve. "Let it go, Silas. Devereaux will kill us anyway if we show up without her." Silas spat on the ground but remained where he was. Ross turned back to Lillian. "Can you ride, Miss Montgomery?" "Yes," she replied. "My father taught me." "Good." He helped her down from the wagon, his touch gentle but firm. "We need to put some distance between us and these two before nightfall." As Ross assisted Lillian onto his horse, mounting behind her, she felt a strange mixture of fear and hope. She was entrusting her life to a man she'd just met, yet something in his steady gaze told her she could trust him. "Where are we going?" she asked as they rode away, leaving her uncle and Jeb standing impotently by the wagon. "I have a cabin about half a day's ride from here," Ross replied. "You'll be safe there while we figure out your next move." Lillian relaxed slightly against him, the rhythmic movement of the horse and the solid presence of the cowboy behind her providing an unexpected comfort. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps her future wasn't sealed after all. As they rode across the prairie, the sun beginning its descent toward the western horizon, Lillian studied the landscape with new eyes. The wildflowers dotting the grassland, the distant mountains, the endless sky all seemed to promise possibility rather than imprisonment. "Thank you," she said softly, her words nearly carried away by the wind. "You saved my life today." Ross's reply was simple but sincere. "No one deserves to be treated as property, Miss Montgomery, especially not someone with your courage." Lillian turned slightly to look at him. "My courage? You called out for help when you had the chance," he explained. "Many would have been too frightened to speak up." The compliment warmed her, though she wasn't sure she deserved it. "I was desperate," she admitted. "When I saw you on the trail, it felt like my last hope." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves and the occasional cry of a hawk circling overhead. Eventually, curiosity got the better of Lillian. "How did you know about me?" she asked. "You said you heard talk in town, but why would anyone discuss my situation?" Ross adjusted his hold on the reins. "Claude Devereaux makes no secret of his." Acquisitions. He was boasting in the saloon about the pretty young bride being delivered to him. Said your uncle had shown him a photograph. Lillian felt a chill despite the warmth of the afternoon. He sounds horrible. He is, Ross confirmed. His last wife disappeared under suspicious circumstances. Some say she ran off, but others believe he trailed off, apparently deciding the details were too grim to share. And you decided to intervene just based on saloon talk, Lillian pressed. There was a pause before Ross answered. No, I had personal reasons to be concerned about any woman being sent to Devereaux. Something in his tone told Lillian not to question further, at least not yet. Instead, she changed the subject. You mentioned a cabin. Do you live alone? I do, he replied. It's not much, but it's mine. I worked 3 years as a ranch hand to save enough to buy that piece of land. It's good grazing country. You're a rancher, then? On a small scale, Ross said with a hint of pride. I've got 30 head of cattle and plans to expand next year. The railroad's coming through these parts soon, which means better prices for beef. As they talked, Lillian learned that Ross had come west after the war between the states, seeking a fresh start like so many others. He'd been just 16 when he left his home in Pennsylvania, working his way across the country as a cowhand, until finding this corner of Montana territory that spoke to his soul. The sun was low on the horizon when they finally approached a small valley nestled between gentle hills. A modest cabin stood near a creek, with a corral and small barn nearby. It wasn't much compared to the fine house Lillian had grown up in back east, but there was something inviting about its sturdy simplicity. Home, Ross announced, guiding his horse toward the cabin. He helped Lillian dismount, steadying her when her legs wobbled after the long ride. The feeling of solid ground beneath her feet was both welcome and disorienting. Are you all right? Ross asked, concern evident in his face. Lillian nodded, though in truth she felt overwhelmed by the day's events. Just tired, she said. Of course. Come inside and rest while I tend to thunder. The cabin's interior was surprisingly neat for a bachelor's dwelling. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a wooden table and 2 chairs positioned nearby. A curtain separated the main room from what Lillian presumed was the sleeping area. Please sit, Ross said, gesturing to one of the chairs. I'll be back shortly. Left alone, Lillian sank into the chair and tried to process everything that had happened. That morning, she had awakened resigned to her fate. Now, she was free but also completely dependent on the goodwill of a man she barely knew. The thought was both liberating and terrifying. Ross returned a few minutes later, bringing with him a bucket of fresh water from the creek. You can wash up if you'd like, he offered. I'm afraid I don't have many amenities suitable for a lady, but there's clean water and soap. Lillian accepted gratefully. The cool water felt heavenly on her dust-streaked face and hands. I'll prepare something to eat, Ross said, moving to a small pantry area. Nothing fancy, but it should satisfy hunger. I can help, Lillian offered, wanting to be useful. Ross seemed surprised but nodded. Thank you. Working together, they prepared a simple meal of beans, bacon, and cornbread. Lillian was grateful for the domestic activity. It gave her something concrete to focus on besides her uncertain future. As they ate by the light of an oil lamp, Lillian found herself studying Ross. In the soft glow, his features appeared less weathered, revealing a handsome face marked by experiences beyond his years. His hands, calloused from ranch work, handled his utensils with unexpected grace. What will happen now? She finally asked, setting down her fork. Ross considered her question carefully. That depends on what you want, Miss Montgomery. Devereaux has influence in this territory, but he's not all-powerful. We could arrange passage for you to California or perhaps back east. I have no one back east, Lillian said quietly. My parents were my only family besides Uncle Sela's, and he's proven what his priorities are. I'm sorry about your parents, Ross said with genuine sympathy. Losing family is never easy. They died of fever last winter, Lillian explained. My father was a professor of literature. We lived modestly but happily. When they passed, Uncle Sela's appeared my father's half-brother, whom I'd met only once before. He claimed guardianship since I wasn't of age yet, and immediately began arranging your marriage to Devereaux, Ross concluded. Lillian nodded. For a finder's fee, as he called it. Ross's expression darkened. Men like that deserve a special place in hell. They sat in silence for a moment before Lillian spoke again. You said you had personal reasons for intervening. May I ask what they were? Ross stared into his coffee cup for so long that Lillian thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and tinged with old pain. My sister, he said. She was married off to a man like Devereaux when I was away fighting in the war. By the time I returned home and found out what had happened, it was too late. Her husband had. He paused, swallowing hard. She couldn't take the abuse anymore. She took her own life. Oh, Ross, Lillian whispered, instinctively reaching across the table to touch his hand. I'm so sorry. He nodded, accepting her sympathy. I came west partly to escape those memories, but when I heard about you, I couldn't stand by and let history repeat itself. The revelation created a new understanding between them, a bond forged from shared pain and compassion. You should rest now, Ross said, gently withdrawing his hand. You can take the bed. I'll make up a pallet out here by the fire. Lillian wanted to protest, to insist she wouldn't displace him from his own bed, but exhaustion was rapidly overtaking her. Thank you, she said instead. For everything. The bed behind the curtain was simple but clean, with a quilt that smelled of sunshine and pine. Lillian removed her shoes and outer clothing but kept on her chemise and petticoat, then slipped beneath the covers. Despite her fatigue, sleep didn't come immediately. Her mind whirled with the day's events and the uncertainty of what lay ahead. Through the thin curtain, she could see Ross's silhouette as he moved quietly around the cabin, banking the fire for the night and preparing his makeshift bed. A strange feeling of safety enveloped her, strange because by all logic, she should be terrified. She was alone in a remote cabin with a man she'd known for less than a day. Yet somehow, she trusted Ross Blackwood. Perhaps it was the way he'd handled the confrontation with her uncle, showing restraint when he could have resorted to greater violence. Or maybe it was the pain she'd glimpsed in his eyes when he spoke of his sister. Whatever the reason, Lillian fell asleep feeling more secure than she had in months. The rhythmic sound of Ross's breathing in the outer room a comforting reminder that she was no longer alone. Morning came with the cheerful songs of meadowlarks and the gentle nickering of thunder in the corral. Lillian awoke disoriented at first, the unfamiliar surroundings momentarily confusing her. Then the events of the previous day rushed back, and she sat up, listening for sounds of Ross in the cabin. Hearing nothing, she rose and straightened her rumpled clothing as best she could. She drew back the curtain to find the main room empty, though a small fire crackled in the hearth and a pot of coffee simmered nearby. A note sat on the table, written in a surprisingly elegant hand. Miss Montgomery, gone to check the perimeter and hunt breakfast. Please make yourself at home. R.B. Lillian smiled at the formality of the note. She poured herself a cup of coffee and stepped outside, eager to see Ross's homestead in the light of day. The morning was glorious, the valley bathed in golden sunlight that made the dew-covered grass sparkle like diamonds. The cabin sat on a gentle slope above a clear creek, with pine-covered hills rising in the distance. To the west, A small herd of cattle grazed peacefully in a meadow. Lillian breathed deeply, savoring the clean, pine-scented air. After months of feeling trapped, the open space was intoxicating. She walked down to the creek, admiring wildflowers along the way. Kneeling by the water, she splashed her face and neck, the cool water refreshing her completely. "Good morning." Ross's voice startled her. She turned to find him approaching with 2 rabbits in hand, the results of his morning hunt. "Good morning," she replied, suddenly self-conscious about her disheveled appearance. "I was just freshening up." "The creek has the sweetest water for miles around," Ross said. "One of the reasons I chose this spot." He held up the rabbits. "Breakfast if you're amenable." "Very much so," Lillian said, realizing she was genuinely hungry. "May I help prepare them?" Ross looked surprised again, just as he had the night before. "Most ladies I've known would rather not handle the messy parts of preparing game." Lillian smiled. "My father believed in practical education. He taught me to cook whatever we might catch or grow. I can clean a rabbit, though I'm out of practice." An appreciative glint appeared in Ross's eyes. "Well then, Miss Montgomery, I'd welcome your assistance." As they worked together to prepare the meal, Lillian felt a growing comfort in Ross's presence. There was something refreshingly straightforward about him, no pretense, no hidden agendas, just honest work and direct speech. "What will you do today?" she asked as they sat down to eat the rabbits, which they had stewed with wild onions and the last of yesterday's cornbread. "I need to ride out and check on my herd," Ross replied. "Make sure they haven't strayed too far. After that, I thought we might discuss your options going forward." Lillian nodded, appreciating his practical approach. "Could I? Would it be possible for me to accompany you to see your land?" The request seemed to please him. "Of course, if you're feeling up to riding again so soon." "I am," she assured him. "And I'd like to see more of this beautiful country." After breakfast, Ross saddled Thunder and a smaller, gentle mare he kept for pack trips. "This is Daisy," he explained, helping Lillian mount. "She's steady and sure-footed, perfect for a lady rider." Lillian settled into the saddle, grateful that Ross had found her a proper riding skirt among his limited supplies. It must have belonged to a previous visitor, though she didn't ask whose. They rode out together, following the creek upstream into the rolling hills that bordered Ross's property. The morning was perfect, not too hot, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of sage and wildflowers. Ross pointed out landmarks and boundaries, speaking with obvious pride about the land he had claimed as his own. "Over there," he said, indicating a distant meadow, "I'm planning to build a proper ranch house next year, something more suitable than my bachelor cabin." "Your cabin is lovely," Lillian assured him. "So snug and well kept." Ross looked pleased at the compliment. "It serves its purpose for now. But a man has to think of the future." They found the cattle grazing contentedly in a high meadow, fat and healthy-looking. Ross did a quick count, nodding with satisfaction. "All present and accounted for," he said. "No predator problems lately, which is a blessing." As they sat their horses side by side, looking out over the valley below, Lillian felt a strange sense of belonging. This wild, beautiful country spoke to something deep within her, a yearning for freedom and purpose that had been stifled in her uncle's house. "It's magnificent," she said softly. "I can see why you chose this place." Ross nodded. "First time I rode through this valley, I knew this was where I wanted to put down roots. Took me 3 years of saving every penny to make it happen, but it was worth it." "You've built something wonderful here," Lillian said sincerely. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a moment of shared appreciation not just for the land, but for each other's understanding of its value. Lillian looked away first, a flush warming her cheeks. They rode back to the cabin in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. As they cared for the horses together, Lillian considered her situation. She had no home to return to, no family who truly wanted her welfare. Her parents' modest savings would sustain her for a while, but what then, over a simple lunch, Ross brought up the subject they'd been avoiding. "We need to discuss what happens next," he said. "Devereaux won't simply accept losing his investment. He'll be looking for you." Lillian nodded, her stomach tightening at the thought. "What do you suggest?" "The safest option would be for you to leave the territory entirely," Ross said carefully. "I could escort you to the railroad at Fort Benton. From there, you could go to Helena or perhaps all the way to San Francisco." The thought of leaving, of never seeing Ross or this beautiful valley again, caused an unexpected pang in Lillian's heart. But what alternative did she have? "That seems sensible," she agreed reluctantly. "When would we leave?" "Not immediately," Ross assured her. "We should wait a week or so, let things settle. Devereaux will have men watching the obvious routes out of the area." Relief flooded through Lillian. A week. A week in this peaceful place with this intriguing man. "Then what shall I do in the meantime?" she asked. Ross seemed to hesitate before answering. "If you're willing, I could use some help around the ranch. Nothing too strenuous, but an extra pair of hands is always valuable." "I'd be happy to help," Lillian said quickly, eager to be useful. "I'm stronger than I look, and I learn quickly." The corners of Ross's eyes crinkled as he smiled. "I don't doubt it, Miss Montgomery." "Lillian," she corrected him. "Please call me Lillian. After saving me from a forced marriage, I think you've earned the right to use my given name." "Lillian," he repeated, as if testing how it felt on his tongue. "Then you must call me Ross." A simple exchange of names, yet it felt significant. A small but meaningful step toward friendship, or perhaps something more. That afternoon, Ross showed Lillian around the ranch in greater detail, explaining his daily routines and the seasonal work that needed to be done. Despite his bachelor status, he ran an efficient, well-organized operation. "Most cowboys dream of having their own spread someday," he explained as they walked back from the small smokehouse where he preserved meat. "But few manage it. Takes a combination of luck, hard work, and planning." "And you had all three?" Lillian asked. Ross shrugged modestly. "I had the advantage of learning from others' mistakes. Watched too many men lose everything gambling or drinking or trying to expand too quickly." By the time evening arrived, Lillian had a new appreciation for the life Ross had built for himself. It wasn't easy or glamorous, but it was honest and rewarding, a stark contrast to the future that had awaited her with Claude Devereaux. The next few days fell into a pleasant rhythm. Lillian threw herself into ranch life, helping with cooking, mending, and even learning to milk the 2 cows Ross kept for fresh dairy. She insisted on contributing, unwilling to be merely a guest when there was work to be done. Ross, for his part, seemed both amused and impressed by her determination. "You're not what I expected," he admitted on the third evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. "What did you expect?" Lillian asked, curious. Ross considered the question. "I suppose I thought you'd be more delicate, more like the Eastern ladies I've encountered in town who seem horrified by the realities of frontier life." Lillian laughed softly. "My mother would be disappointed to hear that. She worked very hard to make me a proper lady." Her smile faded slightly. "But circumstances change us, don't they? After my parents died, I learned quickly that being delicate was a luxury I couldn't afford." Ross's gaze was thoughtful. "Adversity reveals character, they say. It doesn't create it, just shows what was already there." The simple wisdom of his words touched Lillian. "What do you think adversity revealed about you?" she asked. Ross was quiet for a long moment. "That I'm more stubborn than smart sometimes," he finally said with a self-deprecating smile. And that I can't abide seeing injustice without trying to do something about it, even when it would be safer to look away. Those sound like virtues to me, Lillian said softly. Their eyes met in the fading light, and Lillian felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with fear or uncertainty. There was something happening between them, something unexpected and potentially wonderful, but also complicated by their circumstances. The moment was broken by the distant howl of a wolf. Ross stood, scanning the darkening landscape with the instinctive vigilance of a man responsible for livestock. "We should head inside," he said. "Night comes quickly this time of year." Later, as Lillian lay in Ross's bed still in arrangement she protested daily, and he insisted upon just as firmly, she found herself imagining what it would be like to stay. To make this cabin her home, to work alongside Ross building his ranch, to watch the seasons change in this beautiful valley. The fantasy was so vivid it almost hurt, because she knew it couldn't be real. In less than a week, she would be gone from this place, from Ross's life. The thought was becoming increasingly painful to contemplate. On the 5th day, everything changed. Ross had ridden out early to repair a section of fence on the north boundary. Lillian, having finished her morning chores, decided to bake bread as a surprise for his return. She was just removing the golden loaf from the oven when she heard hoofbeats approaching, too many for just Ross returning. Her heart racing, Lillian peered through the window. 3 riders were approaching the cabin, none of them Ross. She recognized her Uncle Silas immediately, his portly figure unmistakable even at a distance. The other 2 men were strangers to her, but their hard faces and the way they carried their rifles suggested they weren't making a social call. Panic gripped her for a moment before clarity set in. She couldn't run. They would see her immediately in the open country surrounding the cabin. Fighting was out of the question. Her only option was to face them and somehow stall until Ross returned. Taking a deep breath, Lillian opened the cabin door and stepped onto the porch, trying to project a confidence she didn't feel. "Uncle Silas," she called as the riders approached. "This is an unexpected visit." Silas reined in his horse, his face mottled with anger. "You ungrateful little fool," he spat. "Do you have any idea the trouble you've caused? Mr. Devereaux is furious." "I'm sorry to hear that," Lillian replied coolly. "But as I told you repeatedly, I have no desire to marry him." The larger of Silas's companions, a man with a scar running down one cheek, laughed unpleasantly. "Ain't up to you, missy. Mr. Devereaux paid good money, and he expects delivery." "I am not merchandise to be delivered," Lillian said, her voice steady despite her fear. "And I suggest you leave this property immediately. Mr. Blackwood will return shortly, and he won't be pleased to find unwelcome visitors." "Blackwood," the scarred man repeated, exchanging glances with his companion. "That would be Ross Blackwood." Something in his tone made Lillian's blood run cold. "Yes, this is his ranch." The third man, who had remained silent until now, chuckled darkly. "Well now, that's interesting. Boss will be pleased to hear that." "2 birds with 1 stone, eh, Mac?" The scarred man Mac nodded. "Mount up, girl. You're coming with us, and we're going to wait right here for your cowboy friend to return." Lillian's mind raced. They knew Ross, and not in a friendly way. This was about more than her marriage to Devereaux. "I'm not going anywhere," she said firmly, taking a step back toward the cabin door. Mac dismounted in one fluid motion, his hand moving to his gun. "Don't make this difficult. We can do this easy or we can do it hard. Your choice." Silas looked nervously between Lillian and the gunman. "Now, see here, the agreement was to bring her back unharmed. Devereaux was very specific." "Shut up, old man," Max snapped. "You'll get your money. But Mr. Devereaux has additional business with Blackwood, and this is a perfect opportunity to settle it. Lillian's hand found the door handle behind her. If she could get inside, lock the door, perhaps find Ross's spare rifle. But Mac was too quick. In 3 long strides, he was up the porch steps and gripping her arm painfully. "Inside," he ordered, pushing her back through the door she'd been planning to use as protection. The next hour was the longest of Lillian's life. Mac and his companion, whom he called Jonesy, searched the cabin thoroughly, helping themselves to Ross's coffee and the bread Lillian had just baked. Silas sat uncomfortably at the table, avoiding Lillian's accusing gaze. "So," Mac said, leaning back in Ross's chair, "how long have you been staying with Blackwood, girl?" "That's none of your concern," Lillian replied coldly. Mac's eyes narrowed. "Has he told you about his history with Devereaux, about why he really rescued you?" Confusion flickered across Lillian's face before she could control it. "I know enough," she said, unwilling to reveal that Ross had told her only about his sister, not about any personal conflict with Devereaux. Mac laughed. "I doubt that. Blackwood has a personal vendetta against the boss." "This ain't about chivalry, girl. It's about revenge." Before Lillian could respond, Jonesy, who had been watching by the window, straightened. "Ryder coming. It's him." Mac nodded. "Good. Jonesy, get behind the door. Old man, you stay put and keep your mouth shut." He grabbed Lillian's arm again, pulling her to her feet. "You're going to stand right here by the window where he can see you. One wrong move, one warning shout, and I put a bullet in you. Understand?" Lillian nodded, her mind desperately seeking a way to warn Ross. She could see him now, riding toward the cabin at an easy pace, unaware of the danger awaiting him. As Ross dismounted and tied Thunder to the hitching post, Lillian tried to compose her features, to give some signal with her eyes that something was wrong. But Mac's grip on her arm tightened painfully, and the barrel of his gun pressed against her side. "Just smile like everything's normal," he hissed. Ross approached the cabin, his expression changing from pleasant anticipation to wariness as he noticed Lillian's stiff posture in the window. His hand moved subtly toward his gun as he mounted the porch steps. The moment he opened the door, Jonesy struck, bringing the butt of his rifle down on Ross's head with a sickening crack. Ross crumpled to the floor, blood streaming from a gash above his temple. "Ross!" Lillian cried out, trying to break free from Mac's grip. "Tie him up," Mac ordered Jonesy. "He's no good to the boss dead." As Jonesy bound Ross's unconscious form with rope, Lillian turned furious eyes on her uncle. "How could you do this?" "These men aren't just taking me to Devereaux, they're going to hurt Ross." Silas looked uncomfortable. "This wasn't part of the arrangement," he muttered. "I was just supposed to bring you back." "You're a coward," Lillian spat. "First you sell your own niece, and now you stand by while these thugs assault an innocent man." "Innocent," Mac laughed harshly. "Blackwood is many things, but innocent ain't one of them. He killed the boss's brother 2 years ago." Lillian's eyes widened in shock. "That's not possible." "Ross isn't a murderer." "Call it what you want," Mac said with a shrug. "There was a dispute over water rights. Words were exchanged, guns were drawn, and when it was over, Frank Devereaux was dead and Blackwood had disappeared. Boss has been looking for him ever since." Ross groaned, beginning to regain consciousness. Jonesy had finished binding his hands and feet and propped him against the wall. "Welcome back," Mac said as Ross's eyes fluttered open. "Been a while since we've seen you around these parts, Blackwood." Ross's gaze, still unfocused from the blow, found Lillian. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough. "I'm all right," she assured him, touched that his first concern was for her safety. "How touching," Mac sneered. "The killer has a soft spot for the lady." Ross's eyes hardened as he took in the situation, Mac holding Lillian, Jonesy standing guard, Silas fidgeting nervously at the table. "Whatever quarrel you have with me, it doesn't involve Miss Montgomery," he said. "Let her go." "No can do," Mac replied. "The boss wants both of you. Her for marriage, you for a hanging." Lillian gasped, cold fear washing over her. "You can't be serious." "Dead serious," Max said. "Now, we're all going to take a nice ride to the Devereaux Ranch. The boss is expecting us by nightfall." As Jonesy hauled Ross to his feet, Lillian caught his eye. Despite his bound hands and bleeding head, there was a steady determination in his gaze that gave her hope. He had a plan or would form one. They weren't defeated yet. The journey to the Devereaux Ranch was grim and tense. Ross, his hands tied to his saddle horn, rode silently, though Lillian could tell from his occasional winces that his head wound was causing him considerable pain. She rode beside him, while Mac led Thunder and Jonesy brought up the rear. Silas followed at a distance, clearly uncomfortable with how events were unfolding. "I'm sorry," Lillian said quietly when the others weren't paying attention. "They were waiting when I was alone." "Not your fault," Ross replied, his voice low. "I should have anticipated this." Devereaux has eyes everywhere. "Is it true?" she couldn't help asking. About his brother, Ross's expression tightened. "It happened, but not the way they tell it. Frank Devereaux was rustling my cattle. When I confronted him, he drew on me. I had no choice." Lillian believed him instantly. "That's self-defense, not murder." "Try telling that to Claude Devereaux," Ross said grimly. "In his mind, the Devereaux family can do no wrong, and anyone who stands against them deserves death." "What are we going to do?" Lillian whispered, fear edging into her voice. Ross glanced at their captors, then back at her. "First rule of being captured: stay alive until an opportunity presents itself. Keep your eyes open and be ready to move when the time comes." The confidence in his voice reassured her, though their situation seemed dire. As they rode through the afternoon, the landscape gradually changed, the intimate scale of Ross's Valley giving way to the vast expanse of the Devereaux Ranch. Fields of cattle stretched as far as the eye could see, with ranch hands visible in the distance moving herds or riding fence lines. By sunset, they approached a large, impressive ranch house built of timber and stone, with several outbuildings and corrals surrounding it. Unlike Ross's modest cabin, this was a mansion by frontier standards, a statement of wealth and power. Several men emerged from the house as they rode into the yard. At their center was a tall, imposing figure with silver-streaked dark hair and cold eyes that reminded Lillian of a predatory bird. Even without an introduction, she knew this must be Claude Devereaux. "Well, well," Devereaux said as they dismounted. "This is an unexpected pleasure, not only my wayward bride-to-be but also the man who killed my brother." "Excellent work, Mac." Mac nodded, clearly pleased with his employer's approval. "Found them together at Blackwood's place, boss." "Just like you suspected." Devereaux approached Lillian, his assessing gaze making her skin crawl. "Miss Montgomery, I've been looking forward to meeting you. Your uncle spoke highly of your beauty and temperament." The way he said the last word suggested Silas had mentioned her independent nature as something to be broken. "Mr. Devereaux," Lillian acknowledged stiffly, "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. I have no intention of marrying you or anyone else against my will." Devereaux smiled, though the expression never reached his eyes. "Spirit. I admire that in a woman temporarily. You'll find I can be very persuasive, my dear." "Leave her alone, Devereaux," Ross growled, struggling against Jonesy's grip. "Your quarrel is with me." Devereaux turned his attention to Ross, his false pleasantness vanishing. "Blackwood, you've led me on quite a chase these past 2 years. Did you really think you could hide forever in that pathetic excuse for a ranch?" "I wasn't hiding," Ross replied evenly. "I was living my life." Something your brother would still be doing if he hadn't tried to steal from me. Devereaux's face darkened with rage. My brother was worth 10 of you, Cowboy, and you'll pay for taking his life. He turned to his men. Take him to the barn. We'll deal with him at dawn. No. Lillian cried, lunging forward only to be restrained by Mac. You can't do this. I can do whatever I please on my property, Miss Montgomery, Devereaux said coldly. You do well to remember that as the future mistress of this house. As Ross was dragged toward a large barn, he caught Lillian's eye one last time. Stay strong, he mouthed silently. Lillian nodded imperceptibly, fighting back tears. She wouldn't fall apart now, not when Ross needed her to be brave. Now, Devereaux said, taking her arm in a grip that was polite but unbreakable, let me show you to your room. We have preparations to make for tomorrow. Tomorrow? Lillian asked, dread pooling in her stomach. Devereaux smiled his cold smile. Why, our wedding, of course. I've already sent for the preacher. And afterward, we'll have another ceremony, a hanging. Quite a memorable day it will be. Lillian was escorted to a well-appointed bedroom on the second floor of the ranch house. Despite its comfortable furnishings, the locked door and barred windows made it unmistakably a prison. A stern-faced housekeeper named Mrs. Finch brought her a tray of food and a curt instruction to make herself presentable for dinner with Mr. Devereaux. Alone at last, Lillian allowed herself a moment of despair. Ross was being held somewhere on the property, probably enduring far worse conditions than her comfortable captivity. By this time tomorrow, he would be dead, and she would be trapped in a marriage to a monster. No, she whispered fiercely to herself. I won't let that happen. She began methodically examining her prison, searching for any weakness, any possible means of escape. The windows, though barred, offered a view of the ranch yard below. She could see men moving between buildings, horses being led to stables, the normal activities of a large ranch continuing despite the extraordinary events unfolding. Her attention was drawn to the large barn where Ross had been taken. 2 armed men stood guard outside its main doors. If she could somehow escape her room, could she reach Ross? And then what? They would still be deep in enemy territory, outnumbered and pursued. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Miss Montgomery, a young female voice called. I've brought water for washing and a dress for dinner. Lillian composed herself quickly. Come in, she called, remembering that the door was locked from the outside. A key turned in the lock, and a young woman, perhaps 16 years old, entered, carrying a pitcher of water and a bundle of fabric. She had dark hair and wary eyes that darted nervously around the room. I'm Maria, she said quietly, setting down the pitcher beside a wash basin. Mrs. Finch sent me to help you dress. Thank you, Maria, Lillian replied, studying the girl thoughtfully. There was something in her manner, a tension, a watchfulness that suggested she wasn't simply a contented servant. As Maria laid out a fine green dress on the bed, Lillian ventured a question. Have you worked for Mr. Devereaux long? Maria glanced toward the door before answering. 3 years, miss, since my father died owing money to Mr. Devereaux. The implication was clear. The girl was working to pay off her father's debt, likely in conditions close to indentured servitude. An idea began to form in Lillian's mind. Maria, she said carefully, do you know anything about the man they brought in with me? The one they're holding in the barn. Maria hesitated, then nodded. The whole ranch is talking about it. They say he killed Mr. Frank, and now Mr. Devereaux is going to hang him after the wedding. He didn't murder anyone, Lillian said firmly. It was self-defense, and I'm being forced into this marriage against my will. Maria's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't seem entirely surprised. Mr. Devereaux usually gets what he wants, she said simply. Not this time, Lillian replied with quiet determination. "Maria, I need your help." The girl stepped back, alarm crossing her features. "I can't, miss. If Mr. Devereaux found out, I understand your fear," Lillian assured her. "But I'm not asking you to do anything dangerous. I just need information. Can you tell me about the layout of the ranch? How many men guard the barn at night? Are there horses kept saddled and ready?" Maria bit her lip, clearly torn between her fear of Devereaux and some deeper sense of right and wrong. Finally, she sighed. "The barn has two entrances, the main doors that you can see from here, and a smaller door at the back that leads to the corral. They keep 2 men on guard at the front, but the back is usually unwatched." Hope flared in Lillian's chest. "And horses?" "There are always 2 saddled in the stable for emergencies," Maria continued, lowering her voice further. "And the night guard changes at midnight. That's when things are most confused, with men coming and going." Lillian reached out and squeezed the girl's hand gratefully. "Thank you, Maria. You're very brave." Maria looked uncertain. "I haven't done anything, miss." "You've given me hope," Lillian replied. "Now I suppose I should prepare for dinner with my unwanted fiancé." While Maria helped her dress and arrange her hair, Lillian's mind worked feverishly, forming and discarding plans. By the time she was escorted downstairs to the dining room, she had the beginnings of a strategy desperate and dangerous, but better than resignation to her fate. Dinner with Claude Devereaux was every bit as unpleasant as Lillian had anticipated. He dominated the conversation, speaking at length about his properties, his business interests, and the prominent role his wife would play in territorial society. Throughout the meal, he watched her with calculating eyes, as if assessing a prize mare he'd purchased sight unseen. "I understand you've been living unchaperoned with Blackwood for nearly a week," he said abruptly as dessert was served. "A regrettable situation." Lillian met his gaze steadily. "Mr. Blackwood has been a perfect gentleman." Devereaux's mouth twisted in a sardonic smile. "How fortunate. Regardless, the damage to your reputation would be considerable if it became widely known. All the more reason to proceed with our wedding without delay." "There will be no wedding," Lillian said firmly. "I do not consent to marry you, Mr. Devereaux." "Your consent, while preferable, is not strictly necessary," he replied coolly. "The preacher who will perform the ceremony tomorrow is an old friend who understands the practicalities of frontier life. Once the ceremony is complete, you will be legally my wife." Lillian felt cold revulsion wash over her. "And if I refuse to say the words, then I'll say them for you," Devereaux answered with a shrug. "It makes little difference in the end. You're in my house now, under my authority." His casual confidence, his absolute certainty that he could bend the world and her to his will, fueled Lillian's determination. She would not become another victim of this man's tyranny. "And what of Mr. Blackwood?" she asked, forcing herself to remain outwardly calm. "Do you truly intend to hang him?" "Justice for my brother demands no less," Devereaux said, his eyes hardening. "Frank was the better of us, impulsive sometimes, yes, but full of life. Blackwood took that life, and he will pay the price. Even though it was self-defense. Your brother was stealing his cattle." Devereaux's hand slammed down on the table, making the silverware jump. "Watch your tongue, Miss Montgomery. You speak of things you know nothing about." Lillian fell silent, recognizing she had pushed too far. For her plan to work, she needed Devereaux to believe she was resigned to her fate, or at least too frightened to resist further. "Forgive me," she said, lowering her eyes in a show of submission. "This has all been overwhelming." Devereaux's expression softened slightly. "Understandable. You've had a trying few days. Rest assured, once we're married, you'll want for nothing. This house, my wealth, my protection, all will be yours, so long as you fulfill your duties as my wife." The implication behind his words made Lillian's skin crawl, but she forced herself to nod meekly. "May I retire now? I'm very tired, and if tomorrow is to be our wedding day, I should rest." Devereaux studied her for a moment, perhaps searching for signs of deception, before nodding. "Of course. Mrs. Finch will escort you to your room." As Lillian rose from the table, Devereaux caught her hand, pressing a cold kiss to her knuckles. "Sleep well, my dear. Tomorrow begins our life together." Back in her room, with the door once again locked from the outside, Lillian wasted no time. She changed out of the fine dress Maria had brought, putting on her own simpler clothing that would allow for easier movement. Then she sat by the window, watching and waiting as the ranch settled into its nighttime routine. The hours crawled by. 10 o'clock came and went. At 11, the activity in the yard diminished as most of the ranch hands retired to the bunkhouse. By 11:30, only the guards remained visible, their positions illuminated by lanterns hanging outside the main buildings. Just before midnight, Lillian heard a soft knock at her door. Her heart leapt to her throat. Had her plans been discovered? "Miss," Maria's whisper came through the door. "Are you awake?" Relief flooded through Lillian. She hurried to the door. "Yes, Maria, what is it?" The key turned quietly in the lock, and Maria slipped into the room, her face pale in the lamplight. "I brought you this," she said, holding out a small key. "It's for the back door of the kitchen, and I left a bundle by the woodpile, some food and a knife." Lillian stared at the girl in astonishment. "Maria, I thank you, but why?" Maria's eyes darkened. "My sister was Mr. Devereaux's third wife. They said she ran away, but—" She shook her head, unwilling or unable to continue. No one should be forced to marry against their will. The revelation struck Lillian like a physical blow. Ross had mentioned that Devereaux's previous wife had disappeared under suspicious circumstances. Now she understood the pain behind Maria's eyes and the courage it took for her to help. "Come with us," Lillian urged impulsively. "You don't have to stay here." Maria shook her head. "My brothers still work on the ranch. If I disappeared, Mr. Devereaux would take it out on them." She pressed the key into Lillian's hand. "The guard change is happening now. You should go." With a quick embrace, Maria slipped back out the door, leaving it unlocked behind her. Lillian took a deep breath, gathering her courage. This was her chance, perhaps her only chance, to save both herself and Ross. Moving quietly, she made her way down the back stairs, avoiding the creaking steps she had mentally noted earlier. The house was dark and silent, most of its occupants asleep. She encountered no one as she slipped through the kitchen and used Maria's key to unlock the back door. Outside, the night air was cool and crisp, the sky ablaze with stars. Lillian paused in the shadows by the woodpile, finding the bundle Maria had promised. Inside was a small loaf of bread, some dried meat, a water flask, and a sharp kitchen knife. Tucking these treasures into her pockets, she crept toward the barn, keeping to the shadows and freezing whenever she heard voices or footsteps. As Maria had said, the guard change was creating a brief window of confusion. The men at the front of the barn were talking with their replacements, sharing tobacco and news before the first pair departed. The back of the barn, as promised, was unguarded. Lillian reached the small door Maria had described and eased it open, wincing at the slight creak of the hinges. Inside, the barn was dimly lit by a single lantern hanging from a beam. She could make out stalls for horses, stacked hay, and farming implements hanging on the walls. "Ross," she whispered, moving deeper into the barn. "Are you here?" A muffled sound from the far corner drew her attention. There, tied to a post, was Ross. His face was bruised, a testimony to rough handling by Devereaux's men, and a gag had been tied around his mouth. But his eyes, when they found her in the dim light, blazed with life and determination. Lillian rushed to him, pulling the gag free and using Maria's knife to cut the ropes binding him. "Can you walk?" she whispered urgently. Ross nodded, massaging his wrists where the ropes had cut into them. "How did you get here?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "I had help," Lillian replied simply. "But we need to move quickly. The stables are just beyond the corral and there are horses saddled and ready." Ross's expression was a mixture of amazement and admiration. "You're incredible," he said softly. Then, more practically, "Let me go first. If we're spotted, I'll create a distraction while you make for the horses." Lillian shook her head firmly. "We go together or not at all." A smile flickered across Ross's battered face. "As the lady wishes." Together they crept to the door leading to the corral. Ross peered out, scanning for guards. "Clear for now," he whispered. "The stables are 50 yards to our right." "Ready?" Lillian nodded, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure it would give them away. At Ross's signal, they slipped out of the barn and ran crouched over to the shadow of the corral fence. So far, no alarm had been raised. They were halfway to the stables when a shout rang out from the direction of the main house. "The woman's gone. Check the barn. Run." Ross urged, all pretense at stealth abandoned. They sprinted for the stables, the sound of running feet and shouted orders erupting behind them. As they reached the stable doors, a shot rang out, the bullet splintering wood near Lillian's head. Inside the stables, they found what Maria had promised: 2 horses saddled and ready. Ross helped Lillian mount before swinging into the saddle of the second horse. "Stay close to me," he instructed as they urged the horses out the far side of the stables. More shots followed them as they galloped away from the ranch buildings, but in the darkness, the aim of their pursuers was poor. Soon they were racing across open country, the sound of pursuit growing fainter behind them. Ross led them away from the main trail, cutting across country toward the east. They rode hard for nearly an hour before he finally signaled for them to slow to a walk, giving the horses a chance to recover. "We need to keep moving," he said, scanning the horizon behind them. "They'll organize a proper search at first light." Lillian nodded, though her body ached from the hard ride. "Where are we going?" "Not back to my place," Ross said grimly. "That's the first place they'll look. I know a line shack about 15 miles from here, used by cowboys during the spring roundup. It should be empty this time of year." They rode through the night, the brilliant stars their only guide. Lillian's initial surge of adrenaline faded, leaving her exhausted but stubbornly determined. Beside her, Ross rode with the steady confidence of a man who knew this country intimately, though she could tell from the occasional wince that his injuries were causing him considerable pain. Dawn was breaking when they finally reached the line shack, a crude, one-room structure built of logs and situated in a small hollow beside a spring. It was basic but defensible, with thick walls and small windows that could be easily barricaded. "It's not much," Ross apologized as he helped Lillian dismount, "but it should give us shelter while we decide our next move." Inside, the shack was dusty but intact, with a small fireplace, a rough table and chairs, and 2 narrow bunks built into the wall. Ross quickly checked their supplies while Lillian tended to the horses, hiding them in a small copse of trees behind the shack. When she returned, Ross had started a small fire and was examining a shelf of preserved foods left by the last occupants. "We've got beans, coffee, and some jerky," he reported. "Enough to last a few days if we're careful." Lillian unpacked the supplies Maria had given her, adding them to their meager stores. "What happens now?" she asked, settling into one of the chairs, her legs trembling with fatigue. Ross sat across from her, his face serious in the growing light. "Devereaux won't give up easily. He's proud and we've humiliated him. Plus, he still believes I murdered his brother. Could we go to the law? Lillian suggested. Explain that it was self-defense. The local sheriff is in Devereaux's pocket, Ross said, shaking his head. Our best option is to leave the territory entirely. I have some money saved enough to get us to California or Oregon, maybe start fresh. The word us hung in the air between them, full of unspoken questions and possibilities. I don't want you to feel obligated, Lillian said quietly. You've already risked so much for me. Ross reached across the table, taking her hand in his. His touch was gentle despite the calluses earned from years of ranch work. Lillian, I'm not helping you out of obligation. Surely you must know that by now. The tenderness in his voice made her heart flutter. What am I supposed to know, Ross? She asked, needing to hear him say it. His blue eyes held her steadily. That's somewhere between rescuing you on that trail and being rescued by you from Devereaux's barn. I fell in love with you. The simple declaration, spoken without embellishment or pretense, took Lillian's breath away. It wasn't just the words themselves, but the absolute certainty with which Ross said them, as if stating an undeniable fact of nature. You love me, she whispered. I do, he confirmed. I understand if you don't feel the same. We've known each other only a short time and under extraordinary circumstances. But if you could consider, Lillian silenced him by leaning across the table and pressing her lips to his. The kiss was brief but full of promise, and when she pulled back, Ross was looking at her with wonder. I love you too, she said simply. I think I have since that first day when you stood in the road and demanded my uncle let me go. Ross's smile transformed his face, erasing the weariness and worry of their ordeal. He rose from his chair, coming around the table to kneel beside her, still holding her hands in his. Then marry me, he said. Not because someone is forcing you, but because you choose to. Be my wife, my partner in whatever life we build together. Tears of joy sprang to Lillian's eyes. Yes, she replied without hesitation. Wherever we go, whatever we face, I want to face it with you. Ross sealed their engagement with another kiss, this one deeper and more lingering than the first. When they finally parted, both were smiling despite their exhaustion and the danger still pursuing them. We should rest, Ross said practically, though his eyes were reluctant to leave hers. We'll need our strength for the journey ahead. They took turns sleeping, one keeping watch while the other rested on one of the narrow bunks. Despite her fatigue, Lillian found it difficult to truly sleep, her mind racing with both fear and hope. They were still in grave danger, yet for the first time since her parents' death, she felt she had a future worth fighting for. Late in the afternoon, Ross woke her from a fitful doze. Riders coming, he said grimly. At least 4 of them, approaching from the south. Lillian was instantly alert, fear knotting her stomach. Devereaux's men, most likely, Ross confirmed, checking his stolen revolver. They're moving slowly like they're searching. They haven't spotted us yet. Through the small window, Lillian could see dust rising in the distance. What do we do? Ross's expression was determined. We can't outrun them. Our horses need more rest. We'll have to make a stand here. The thought of a gun battle, of Ross potentially being killed before their life together could even begin, was unbearable. There must be another way, Lillian insisted. Ross was silent for a moment, thinking. Then his eyes lit with a dangerous idea. There might be. It's risky, but if it works. He explained his plan quickly as the riders drew nearer. It was indeed risky, with a high chance of failure, but it offered a slim hope of resolving the situation without bloodshed. Are you sure about this? Lillian asked when he finished. Ross took her face gently between his hands. No, but I'm sure about us. Whatever happens, know that meeting you was the best thing that ever happened to me. With that, he kissed her once more, then moved to position himself by the door while Lillian took her place at the window, Maria's kitchen knife clutched in her trembling hand. The riders approached cautiously, spreading out to surround the shack. Lillian recognized Mac among them, but the others were strangers to her tough-looking men with the hard eyes of hired guns. "Blackwood," Mac called out, "we know you're in there. Come out with the woman, and maybe the boss will let you live long enough for a proper hanging." Ross caught Lillian's eye, giving her an encouraging nod before responding. "I want to speak to Devereaux himself," he shouted. "Face to face." There was a conference among the riders before Mac called back. "Boss isn't here, but I can take a message. Tell him I have proof his brother was rustling cattle, proof that will go to the territorial governor if anything happens to me or Miss Montgomery." This was the gamble, a bluff based on a kernel of truth. Ross had told Lillian during their ride that he had indeed reported the rustling to the local law, who had done nothing, but he had also written to a former Army comrade who now worked for the governor's office. There was no guarantee the letter had arrived or would be acted upon, but Devereaux couldn't know that. Silence followed Ross's declaration. Then, "What kind of proof?" "Sworn statements from 3 witnesses who saw Frank Devereaux driving my cattle," Ross improvised. "Plus documentation of threats he made against me before I confronted him. All safely delivered to someone who will act if we don't return." More conference among the riders. Lillian held her breath, praying they would believe the bluff. Finally, Mac called out again. "The boss wants to see this proof himself. He's offering a truce you come back to the ranch with us, show him these documents, and if they're legitimate, he'll let the matter drop." Ross and Lillian exchanged skeptical glances. Neither believed for a moment that Devereaux would honor such a truce. "No deal," Ross shouted back. "But I'll meet him on neutral ground, the sheriff's office in Silver Creek, tomorrow at noon. We bring our evidence, he brings his grievance, and we let the law decide." This was the true gamble. The sheriff might be in Devereaux's pocket, but a public confrontation with witnesses would make it harder for him to simply side with the powerful rancher. The riders conferred again, their discussion appearing more heated this time. Finally, Mac approached a few steps closer to the shack. "Boss won't like it, but I'll take your message," he said grudgingly. "Noon tomorrow at the sheriff's office. But if you don't show, or if this proof of yours doesn't exist, there won't be a corner of this territory where you can hide." With that ominous warning, the riders wheeled their horses and departed, keeping a wary eye on the shack until they disappeared over the horizon. When they were gone, Lillian sagged against the wall in relief. "You think they believed you?" Ross holstered his gun with a sigh. "Enough to report back to Devereaux, at least. Whether he believes it is another matter." "Will we actually go to Silver Creek tomorrow?" Lillian asked. Ross nodded slowly. "We have to. It's our only chance to end this without spending the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders." "But we don't have the proof you claimed," Lillian pointed out. "We have some," Ross said. "My letter to James Hartford in the governor's office describing the rustling, and I kept a journal documenting the incidents. It's not as strong as I made it sound, but it might be enough to create doubt, especially in a public setting." Lillian considered this. "And if it's not enough, if Devereaux has the sheriff arrest you, then we'll have to improvise," Ross admitted with a grim smile. "But I'm hoping it doesn't come to that." They spent the rest of the day preparing, resting the horses, gathering their meager supplies, and planning for various contingencies. As night fell, they allowed themselves a small fire, cooking the last of their beans and making coffee. Sitting side by side on one of the bunks, their shoulders touching, they spoke of lighter things, their dreams for the future, memories of happier times, the kind of life they hoped to build together. For a few precious hours, they were not fugitives but simply a man and woman in love, planning their life together. As they prepared to sleep, both too anxious to take turns on watch this night, Ross pulled Lillian close, cradling her against his chest. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he whispered into her hair, "know that you've given me more happiness in these few days than I thought possible." Lillian turned in his arms, looking up at his face in the dying firelight. "We will have many more days together," she said with a fierceness that surprised even her. "I refuse to accept any other outcome." Ross's smile was tender as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. "With that kind of determination, how can we fail?" They rode into Silver Creek just before noon the next day, dusty and tired but resolved. The small frontier town was busier than usual, word of the confrontation having spread. Curious onlookers gathered on the boardwalks, watching as Ross and Lillian made their way down the main street toward the sheriff's office. Outside the jailhouse, several horses were already tied up, including the distinctive black stallion that Claude Devereaux favored. The man himself stood on the boardwalk, flanked by Mac and two other armed men, his cold eyes fixed on them as they approached. Ross helped Lillian dismount, then whispered, "Stay close to me, but if trouble starts, get to that alley beside the general store. Emma Winters, who runs the place, is a friend." Lillian nodded, her throat too dry for speech. Together they walked toward the sheriff's office, the gathered crowd falling silent as they passed. "Blackwood," Devereaux acknowledged coldly as they reached the boardwalk. "I see you brought your accomplice." "My fiancée," Ross corrected firmly, taking Lillian's hand in his. The public declaration sent a ripple of murmurs through the watching crowd. Sheriff Tanner emerged from his office, a portly man with a gray mustache and shifty eyes. "Let's take this inside," he suggested, clearly uncomfortable with the public spectacle unfolding on his doorstep. Inside the jailhouse, the tension was palpable. Ross and Lillian stood on one side of the sheriff's desk, Devereaux and Mac on the other, with Sheriff Tanner seated uncomfortably between them. "Now then," the sheriff began, "I understand there's a dispute to be settled." Devereaux spoke first, his voice controlled but edged with anger. "It's quite simple, Sheriff. This man murdered my brother 2 years ago, then kidnapped the woman who was traveling to become my wife. I want justice." "That's not how it happened," Ross countered calmly. "Frank Devereaux was rustling my cattle. When I confronted him, he drew on me. I fired in self-defense." He placed a journal and folded letter on the sheriff's desk. "I documented the rustling incidents here, and I reported them to your office, though no action was taken. I also wrote to James Hartford in the governor's office, detailing the situation." Sheriff Tanner shifted uncomfortably at the mention of the governor's office. "I don't recall any such report," he muttered, though his eyes betrayed his lie. "And as for kidnapping," Lillian interjected, her voice steady despite her fear, "I was being taken against my will to marry Mr. Devereaux, a man I had never met, who had essentially purchased me from my uncle." This revelation caused a stir among the townspeople who had crowded into the office behind them. "Bought and paid for," spoke up a familiar voice, and Lillian turned to see her Uncle Silas pushing his way forward. "I had a deal with Devereaux, and Blackwood interfered." "You cannot sell another human being, Mr. Montgomery," Ross said firmly. "Not even your niece." The sheriff looked increasingly uncomfortable. "This is all very complicated," he hedged. "Perhaps we should. It's not complicated at all," came a new voice from the doorway. A slender young woman with dark hair stepped into the office. It was Maria, Devereaux's servant girl. "Mr. Devereaux forced his last wife to marry him too, and when she tried to leave, he killed her." A shocked silence fell over the room, Devereaux's face contorted with rage. "You lying little—" "I'm not lying," Maria continued, her voice gaining strength. My sister Alina was his third wife. She wasn't running away when she disappeared. I found her shawl buried behind the smokehouse last spring with bloodstains on it. The sheriff looked from Maria to Devereaux, clearly uncertain how to proceed with these new allegations. "This is absurd," Devereaux blustered. "The girl is clearly in league with them." "I've never met her before," Ross said truthfully. "But if what she says is true, it establishes a pattern of behavior that makes Miss Montgomery's account more credible." More murmurs from the gathered crowd. Public opinion, which might have been divided given Devereaux as standing in the community, was shifting perceptibly. Devereaux seemed to sense this shift. His expression hardened as he realized his usual tactics of intimidation and influence might not prevail in this public forum. "Enough of this," he snapped. "Sheriff, arrest Blackwood for the murder of my brother. We can sort out these wild accusations later." The sheriff hesitated, looking around at the watching townspeople. A public arrest based on a 2-year-old incident, in the face of serious counter-accusations, was clearly not what he had anticipated. Into this tense moment stepped a tall, distinguished-looking man wearing an Eastern-cut suit. "I believe I can offer some clarification," he said, his cultured voice carrying authority. All eyes turned to the newcomer. "And who might you be?" Sheriff Tanner asked. "James Hartford, special assistant to the territorial governor," the man replied, producing official-looking credentials. "I received Mr. Blackwood's letter some weeks ago and have been investigating the claims independently." Ross looked as surprised as everyone else. "Mr. Hartford," he acknowledged, "I wasn't certain my letter had reached you." Hartford nodded. "It did indeed. And it prompted me to make inquiries about several unsolved cattle thefts in this region, as well as the curious pattern of disappearances among Claude Devereaux's wives." Devereaux's face had gone pale. "This is preposterous. I demand—" "You are in no position to demand anything, Mr. Devereaux," Hartford cut him off coolly. "Based on evidence gathered by my office, including testimony from former employees of your ranch, I am here to place you under arrest for the murder of Alina Vasquez Devereaux." The jailhouse erupted in chaos. Mac reached for his gun, only to be stopped by the surprising appearance of several armed men who had entered quietly during Hartford's announcement. Deputies from the territorial marshal's office, Lillian realized. In the confusion, Devereaux made a desperate lunge toward Lillian, perhaps thinking to use her as a hostage. But Ross was quicker, stepping between them and landing a solid punch that sent the rancher staggering backward into the arms of Hartford's deputies. "It's over, Devereaux," Ross said firmly. "You've controlled this valley through fear for too long." As the deputies led Devereaux away, Sheriff Tanner looked thoroughly deflated. His patron's power had been broken, and his own complicity in ignoring crimes would likely come to light in the subsequent investigation. Hartford approached Ross and Lillian. "Mr. Blackwood, your letter came at a fortuitous time. We had already begun investigating Devereaux based on other complaints, but your detailed account of the rustling incidents helped establish a pattern of lawlessness that extended well beyond cattle theft." "Thank you for taking it seriously," Ross replied, still somewhat stunned by this unexpected turn of events. Hartford turned to Lillian. "And you must be Miss Montgomery. I understand you've had a rather harrowing experience." "That's putting it mildly," Lillian admitted with a small smile. "But it led me to Ross, so I can't entirely regret it," the official smiled. "Love has a way of blossoming in the strangest circumstances." He grew more serious. "There will be legal matters to attend to, statements to take, testimony at Devereaux's trial, but that can wait a day or two. I imagine you both could use some rest." As the crowd began to disperse, Maria approached Lillian hesitantly. "I wasn't sure if I should come," she admitted, But when I heard you were meeting here, I knew I had to speak the truth about Alina." Lillian embraced the younger woman warmly. "You were very brave. Thank you for helping us both at the ranch and here today." "What will you do now?" Maria asked. "With Mr. Devereaux gone?" "I'm not sure," Lillian replied, glancing at Ross. "We haven't had much time to plan beyond today." Ross took her hand, his thumb gently caressing her fingers. "Actually, I have an idea about that." 2 days later, Ross and Lillian stood before the town's minister in Silver Creek's small church. The hasty wedding was attended by a handful of witnesses, including James Hartford, Maria and her brothers, now freed from their service to Devereaux, and several townspeople who had been impressed by the couple's courage. Lillian wore a simple white dress purchased from the general store, with wildflowers in her hair. Ross had splurged on a new shirt and had actually trimmed his beard for the occasion. As they exchanged vows freely given this time, Lillian felt a profound sense of rightness, as if all the hardships she had endured had been leading her to this moment, to this man. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss your bride." Ross's kiss was tender yet passionate, a promise of the life they would build together. When they turned to face their small congregation as Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood, the applause was enthusiastic. The celebration afterward was modest but joyful, held in the town's only restaurant. As Lillian and Ross received congratulations from their well-wishers, James Hartford approached with an unexpected wedding gift. "The territorial court has frozen Devereaux's assets pending his trial," he explained. "But given the circumstances of his crimes against both of you, the governor has approved a special dispensation." He handed Ross an official-looking document. "This grants you legal title to the water rights Devereaux illegally claimed from your property, plus compensation for the cattle his brother stole." Ross stared at the document in disbelief. "This is more than generous," Hartford smiled. "It's justice, Mr. Blackwood, long overdue in these parts." As the celebration continued, Ross led Lillian outside for a moment of privacy on the restaurant's back porch. The evening was perfect, stars beginning to appear in the deepening blue of the sky. "Happy, Mrs. Blackwood?" Ross asked, his arms encircling her waist. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Lillian replied truthfully. "Though I still can hardly believe everything that's happened. A week ago, I was being taken against my will to marry a man I'd never met. Now I'm married to the most wonderful man in the territory." "I'm the fortunate one," Ross insisted, brushing a kiss against her temple. "You've given me more than just your love, Lillian. You've given me a future I can believe in." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the first stars emerge. "What happens now?" Lillian finally asked. "Will we go back to your ranch?" "Our ranch," Ross corrected gently. "And yes, as soon as the legal matters here are settled. With Devereaux as compensation, we can expand the herd, maybe even start building that proper house I mentioned." "I liked your cabin," Lillian said with a smile. "It felt like a home from the moment I stepped inside." "It will be even more of a home with you in it permanently," Ross replied. "But I want to give you the kind of house you deserve, room for a proper library, since you mentioned loving books. And maybe—" He hesitated, a hint of vulnerability crossing his face. "Maybe room for children someday, if you want that." Lillian's heart swelled with love for this man who had saved her in more ways than one. "I want everything with you, Ross Blackwood. A home, children, a life together in that beautiful valley. It's more than I ever dared dream of." Ross's kiss was a seal on that shared vision of the future, tender and reverent, yet filled with promise. 5 years later, Lillian stood on the porch of their new ranch house, watching Ross teaching their 3-year-old son, Thomas, to ride his first pony. The little boy's delighted laughter carried across the yard, mingling with the gentle gurgling of the creek and the distant lowing of cattle. So much had changed since that fateful day when Ross had blocked her uncle's wagon on the trail to Silver Creek. Claude Devereaux had been convicted of his wife's murder and would spend the rest of his life in prison. Silas Montgomery had left the territory in disgrace, last heard of trying his luck in the gold fields of Dakota. The Blackwood Ranch had prospered beyond their expectations. With the water rights restored and Ross's careful management, their herd had tripled in size. The railroad's arrival had brought better prices for beef, and their reputation for fair dealing had earned them contracts with several Eastern buyers. The house Ross had promised her was everything Lillian could have wished for, spacious yet cozy, with the library he'd mentioned and room for the family they were building. In addition to Thomas, they had a 1-year-old daughter, Eleanor, named after Lillian's mother, currently napping in her cradle inside. Maria had come to live with them as well, helping with the children and the household. She had blossomed away from Devereaux's oppressive presence, revealing a talent for numbers that made her invaluable in keeping the ranch's accounts. As Lillian watched her husband and son, a contentment so deep it bordered on reverence filled her heart. The path that had brought her here had been fraught with danger and uncertainty, yet she wouldn't change a moment of it. Each step, even the painful ones, had led her to this life, this love. Ross looked up, catching her eye across the yard. Even after 5 years of marriage, that simple connection still sent a thrill through her. He said something to Thomas, then lifted the boy from the pony and set him on his shoulders, walking toward the house. "Mama," Thomas called excitedly, "I rode all by myself." "I saw, my brave boy," Lillian replied with a smile. "You're going to be an excellent horseman like your father." Ross set Thomas down on the porch steps. "Go wash up for dinner, partner. Tell Maria we'll be in shortly." As the boy scampered inside, Ross climbed the steps to join Lillian, drawing her into his arms. "What has you looking so thoughtful, Mrs. Blackwood?" Lillian leaned into his embrace, savoring the solid strength of him. "I was just thinking about how far we've come. How different my life would have been if you hadn't blocked that wagon and decided to involve yourself in a stranger's troubles." Ross's arms tightened around her. "Best decision I ever made," he said simply, "though I'd hardly call it a decision. The moment I saw you, I knew I couldn't let them take you away." "Love at first sight," Lillian teased gently, though part of her wondered if it might be true. She had felt something powerful that day too, something beyond mere gratitude for her rescue. "Something like that," Ross admitted with a smile. "Or maybe recognition, like my heart knew yours before we'd even spoken." The poetry of his words, so unexpected from her practical cowboy husband, moved Lillian deeply. She turned in his arms, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "I love you, Ross Blackwood, more with each passing day. And I love you, Lillian Blackwood, more than I have words to express." As they stood together on the porch of the home they had built, the family they had created safe within its walls, Lillian reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought her to this moment. She had been bound for the stagecoach depot, destined for a life of misery, when a courageous cowboy had blocked the wagon and changed everything. Sometimes the journey that seems most frightening leads to the place where we truly belong. And sometimes the bravest thing we can do is to open our hearts to the possibility of love, even in the most unexpected circumstances. For Lillian and Ross Blackwood, that brave choice had led to a life richer and more fulfilling than either could have imagined, a life built on mutual respect, shared dreams, and a love that had begun in danger but would flourish in peace for all the years to come.